McElveen, Chair of the Education Committee. The House will already know I have another illustrious teacher, Mr. Sammy Wilson, who still gives me lectures, but I don't have to listen now at least. But I'm sure both my former teachers in the DUP are very proud of what I've become. The Education Minister has described this bill as the path of least resistance. He has said no one loses. He says this is the minimum legislation. But we're told by a number of speakers that this is a good day for Northern Ireland's education system. I'd say if that's the case, we've set the bar pretty low. The Minister also made reference and to some extent criticised those who point the finger. And I will point the finger. I will point the finger at the Executive, because this is a democracy. You are the government. And if this is the best that you can bring forward, you have failed. And there should be collective responsibility. And we've heard from different parties, and maybe it's more who the Minister is referring to, who are on the Executive. And they've criticised this bill, and they've said they've very little to do with it. And I'm sure Mr McAllister will echo these comments. If you've no say in the government when you've got a minister in something as important as the education bill, I have to query what role you play. So I think I do point the finger at the Executive and the Executive parties. I think they have failed to bring forward an imaginative and progressive education bill, other than something that the Minister himself describes as minimal legislation. And I think it is an opportunity missed. I think there's been an opportunity missed in this bill and in area-based planning. One of the few things in education both the DUP and Sinn Féin seem to agree on is the need to work towards a single education system. It won't happen overnight. I think everyone will accept that. But we're not even taking the steps in that direction, either through this bill or through area-based planning. When we had a segregated system that was crumbling under its own inefficiency, all we have done is seek to prop it up. This legislation continues, as has been acknowledged by most, what is already in place. And area-based planning and the so-called shared education has sought to find imaginative ways to keep an unviable system economically viable. A number of speakers have made mention to the point of the membership of this new authority, and I'll add to it again the need to have a voice from the integrated sector. There is a legal duty to promote and facilitate and encourage integrated education, and I would agree with Mr Lund. Perhaps it should be promote. To me, that is a strategic duty, and the Minister has stressed that this is a strategic body, and I think the integrated sector should at least have a say in that. Because to some extent that duty runs contrary to the interests of some of the other proposed board members. The issue of it's a point that hasn't been made. This is going to be a significant employer in our public sector, this new body. I've seen a figure of 35,000 staff. I don't know, the Minister can confirm if that's correct underneath this body. And I think we have an opportunity to set an example of how the public sector takes forward employment. Again, there's an opportunity in this bill, and I think that it should be written into this bill that this new authority sets an example as a living wage employer. We hear a lot in this Assembly about, and indeed and particularly in wider UK debate, about making work pay, and I think it's important that work does pay for those at the lowest rungs of our public bodies. And I think in this new legislation we have an opportunity to set an example in that regard. And also because the issue of whether the Minister appoints the Chief Executive or whether the Board appoints a Chief Executive, the issue of the Chief Executive's pay will be raised, and I think that should be set. There should be a maximum ratio between the lowest paid under the Board and the highest paid, presumably the Chief Executive. And I think we can perhaps salvage something that will be transformative through this bill in what is an otherwise uninspiring piece of legislation. Chris Hazard made reference to educational excellence, and that's, of course, an ambition that we all have, and we may have different views on how we get there. But I don't think this bill moves as much in that direction. I don't think it's harmful in that regard, but I don't think this is the bill or this is the vehicle. If indeed we can see some efficiency savings, well then that going into frontline education will be welcomed. But we have taken 6-7 years to get here at an expense of £17 million. We were told ESA would have estimated savings of £180 million over 10 years, and whether or not those figures were accurate, it was at least something that we could look towards. I'm yet to hear what, if any, savings will be made from this. Will we recoup that £17 million? Will we see efficiencies? Will we see more money directed into frontline education services? This is minimal legislation that we've all been told must be agreed. But I think it's clear that what the Executive has brought forward doesn't move much forward. As I stated before, we're told that our education sector will welcome this bill, when in fact, in reality, all they will welcome is the end of a long, tired old saga.
Thank you. And I call Mr. Basil McCrae.